Hey folks, Jon Hazlett here from the Ashland Fly Shop. This is a fly casting 101 lesson. We're going to talk a grip, the actual casting stroke itself, how a rod loads and unloads, the timing of a cast, all the casting basics that'll help you be a better single hand caster. So first let's start with the grip and then we'll go on from there. You grip a fly rod sort of like a golf club, but basically I've got my thumb going down the back of the rod, the spine of the rod, and then I'm really holding the rod in my fingers, not so much in my palm, but it's kind of angled through my fingers, and my middle finger, ring finger, and pinky finger are really holding the rod for the most part. My trigger finger needs to be free because that's something that we need for line control when we strip line. I use actually 2 fingers, but most people use 1 when we strip line. And then the back of the rod's the thumb, and that helps stabilize it and gives you that power in the casting stroke. So that's the grip. As we move on from the grip, let's talk about the actual stroke. And what we're trying to accomplish when we make a casting stroke is we're trying to get the line back so the weight of the line bends and loads the rod. It's called rod load. So we try and get the line back, get that rod load, and then use that load on the forward cast to deliver the line. So think of your fly rod as a fly delivery system, and the weight which bends, which loads the rod, is in the fly line itself. So today I have a 9'5" weight. I've got a 5 weight line. A 4 weight line wouldn't work on this rod because it'd just be too light. I could use a 6 weight line. It would overload the rod a little bit, but it would definitely load the rod. So the job is first get it back so you can load it, okay? Get it back. And so as I make my back cast, I propel the line back and I stop the rod. You'll hear 10 and 2 a lot in fly casting. So I stop the rod in that back cast position, which is somewhere in here, about 2 o'clock. And as that line goes back and straightens out, it pulls on the rod, which stores load, creates load, and then I work against that load on that forward cast. So the actual stroke itself, the rod has to travel on a straight line forward and back, and then my stopping points are about here and here, about 10 and 2. Varies a little bit, but that's about right. Because a little more advanced thought is when my rod is under load in the stroke, the tip of my rod comes through on a plane as it loads and unloads. And so if you imagine, here's the plane, as my rod is under load throughout a cast, when I stop in my forward cast, my rod unloads, and so my rod stays on that plane. If my stroke is too long, I get under that plane, okay? So that 10 and 2 is very critical for loading, unloading, to keep the tip of the rod on that plane. And if we have that with a straight line path to and from our target, we're gonna make a good fly cast. So let's get into the timing part of it. The shorter the cast, the shorter the pause, okay? So on a short cast, I pause just long enough for that line to almost straighten out. 1, 2, 1, 2. As I lengthen out, that pause becomes greater. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. Okay, so longer the cast, the longer the pause. If I throw a longer cast, it's going to be a longer pause, so I got to wait for that line to straighten out behind me, create load, which bends the rod, and then I make my forward cast. So the timing changes as you lengthen out the cast. Let's get into the actual stroke itself. You'll find that there's a lot of styles of fly casting. And within these styles, the rod has to do the same thing. It has to bend and unbend, load and unload, has to be on a straight line path to the target, and the tip of the rod has to stay on that plane as it loads and unloads. So there's different styles of casting that all accomplish the same thing. Be it more of a sidearm presentation, okay? More 3/4, or right up over your head, okay? Now these all work, but they all have the same principles: load, unload, 10 and 2, same timing. Rod has to do the same thing. If you're just getting started, I'm going to show you a way that you can start, and then as you get going with it and you do it more, you'll kind of find your sweet spot. But your sweet spot has to be within those parameters of load, unload, rod goes on a straight path, so on and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about what the hands do. Basically, the style I'm going to show you is kind of a West Coast tournament style. And so, an analogy a friend of mine used was, I'm going to pick up the phone. Remember the old phone before we had cell phones? You pick up the phone and you hang it up. You pick up the phone and you hang it up. So as I do this, notice how my top hand, my arm, stays bent at this 9-degree angle. And so when I finish my cast, my forearm is parallel to the ground. As I make my back cast, my upper arm is parallel to the ground, okay? So it's a real up-down motion. And that's a little counterintuitive because we're trying to send the line back and forth. But that up-down motion works quite well, okay? So it looks like this. I start here. I've got that about 90-degree bend. And as I do this, I'm going to keep my wrist nice and loose, okay? Because if I stop here, my wrist can't travel past this part, this angle, okay? It cannot travel past this angle. And as I make my back cast, if my wrist is nice and loose, it doesn't want to travel past this angle. So that's my 10 and 2. So as I come back to make my back cast, I come up to here, upper arm's parallel to the ground, wrist is loose. That's a good back cast angle. And then my forward cast is a nice pull down, okay? And we like to pull down through a stroke. We like to pull through a stroke because it really taps into the butt of the rod where all the power is, okay? So as I pull down through the stroke and I stop, boom, there's my forward cast, okay? So this is kind of a West Coast tournament style that works great. It's a real overhead style, which isn't always going to be the way you want to do it, but it's a great way to get started. And like I said, as you go, you can kind of develop your own style if you stay within the parameters. Now, if I translate that to more of a open or a little more sidearm type cast, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going up and I'm coming down. I'm going up and I'm coming down, okay? So that's kind of where the arm, the forearm, the hand need to be. And the reason we want to do that, okay? The reason we want to do that is because it engages the shoulder muscle. And that's the strongest muscle in this zone. It should be. That's the strongest muscle. What we don't want to do is cast just with the forearm or just with the wrist. Sure, I can get away with short casts, doing a little wrist casts. I'm fishing a little spring creek or whatever, I'm fishing in close. But throughout the day of fishing, you fish for a week, you want to use this shoulder. And so my arm basically stays bent and I'm lifting up with my shoulder and I'm pulling down, okay? So envision the tip of the rod going right up into the sky, okay? The butt of the rod right into the ground, okay? So this is a great casting stroke. It's really clean, it's efficient, and you use the big muscle, your shoulder, and you won't get as fatigued, okay? So this is what it looks like. Up, pull down, up, pull down, okay? And it's a real efficient way to cast, really taps into the power of the rod, and boom, there it goes. Now, there are situations, of course, where, like I said, I've got some trees behind me here, so I might not be able to go up and might go into a tree, but if I use those same principles, do more of a 3/4 cast, I'm still going up and I'm pulling down. Up, pull down, up, pull down, okay? So if you use those principles, you go up with the rod tip, pull down with the butt, you're gonna get a nice clean stroke. It's gonna tap into and engage the butt of the rod where the power is, and you'll really send a nice cast. So there's something we call the loop, okay? So when you make your cast, as your line is parallel to itself and it's going out there, and as it's straightening out and turning over, the line has a bottom leg and a top leg. And it's shaped like, a good loop is shaped kind of like an airplane wing. It's aerodynamic. And if you're making those proper stops, you know, that 10 and 2, you're going to throw a nice loop. And a loop that's tight cuts through the wind, cuts through the air, because it's more aerodynamic. And so we control the size of the loop by where we stop the rod, okay? So if my stroke is too long, I'm going to have a real open loop, which is not efficient, has very little energy, is less likely to turn over and pile up and not be a good cast. If my stroke is too short, okay, my stroke is too short, I'm going to throw a tailing loop, I'm going to hit the tip of the rod, I'm going to have serious problems. So our back casts and forward casts, our stopping points, have to be exactly the same to make this work. And really, your back cast should look exactly like your forward cast, okay? So I like to watch my back cast because I want my rear loop to look just as good as my forward cast. And what it also does, it helps you with your timing, okay? And it tells me when to make my forward cast. I see it about to straighten out, and I initiate my forward stroke. So I prefer personally more of an open stance when I cast. That way I can turn my head and watch my rear loop and see my loop size. And just as it's about to straighten out, that tells me when to make my forward cast. Same in the front. So being able to control the size of your loop is key. And when you're starting out, if you got a good 10 and 2, you're going to have a nice loop. If it's too long, you'll have a real open loop, and that'll cause some problems. So loop control is something that you'll do and get better at as you fish more, but it's important for delivering the fly, having an efficient cast, utilizing the rod load, and, you know, more importantly, making a good cast, getting the fly to the fish, which is really what we're trying to do. So keep that good 10 and 2. Watch that back cast. It'll help with your timing. And another thing about fly casting is how much power does it take? You know, with the rods we have today matched up with a good line, really once that line's back and it's got your rod loaded up, it doesn't take a lot of power to deliver the cast. So in general, when we make a cast, whether it's the back cast or the forward cast, we want a smooth acceleration to the stop, okay? Smooth acceleration to the stop, and you'll get a good result. As you lengthen the line out, yeah, it might take a little more power, but in general, the weight of that line, loading the rod, does the work for you. You know, as a person, we cast with our dominant hand, and we're going to want to really hammer that thing. Well, the result will be bad because we can overload a rod, and when we overload a rod, that creates other problems. So as you get going, you want to think about making your first fly cast with just enough power to lay the line out, okay? Just enough power. And right now, I'm hardly using anything. I mean, I'm really going light here, okay? Ultra smooth, acceleration to the stop, because that stopping point is where the rod unloads, and that's just as important as the loading part. You think about getting that rod loaded a lot, but that unloading part happens as soon as that rod stops, that rod's underload, and boom, it unloads. And if we hit it too hard, we're going to overload the rod, have other issues. Smooth acceleration to stop, and you'll be in the game. So in conclusion, I've got a grip with my thumb up the back of the grip, and It's right about to the top of the grip. I'm really gripping the rod with my fingers and a little bit of my palm. I'm gonna make a cast that's on a straight line path to my target. My timing is gonna vary depending on the length of my cast, so I initiate my forward or back cast just as my line is about to unroll behind me or in front of me. I'm gonna keep a good casting stroke that stays within that 10 and 2 principle for good loop control to make a tight loop. And if you do all those things, you're gonna make a good fly cast. Thanks for tuning in.